What is the biggest epidemic that nobody is really talking about right now? Now, I'm not trying to peddle fear because Lord knows we don't need more fear, but this is really crucial to your understanding. Hello, my name is Jesse. Welcome to my channel, Open Source Owners, where we talk about what if humans had an owner's manual. And if we did, this epidemic would be front and center, and that epidemic is loneliness. Now, I use the model, as you can see in the upper right here, bio, psycho, social, and spiritual, to understand and map the human experience, particularly focused on mental health. That's my sort of main focus. But, that ties into physical health, and that ties into social health, and that ties into environmental health as well. And you can't reduce these four pieces, in my opinion. You need the biological health to be functioning. You need the psychological health to be functioning, and the social health, which was what we're talking about today, as well as the spiritual health, to make a whole, complete, healthy human. And if we're talking about the owner's manual for a human, well, we need those four areas to be in balance, and then we're basically doing okay. So let's talk about this epidemic of loneliness here. Your core mental health is determined by the social context that we are in, keeping in mind that we are basically a mirror of the habits of those closest to us. And that word mirror is an allusion to what we have recently discovered, or it's probably 30 years worth of discovery at this point, but they're called mirror neurons inside of a human brain. When we see somebody crying, when we see somebody smiling, the neurons in our brain sympathetically resonate with the neurons in the other person's brain and body, because they exist in the gut and the heart as well, in what's called a mirroring effect of emotion. And it's proposed that mirror neuron connection is the basis of empathy and the human ability to connect socially. If that is true, it certainly lends credence to the idea that we are social animals. We are bonded to our social atmosphere, our social conditions that we grow up in. So I say here, choose your friends and social groups wisely, because their habits will become your habits in time. So if you really want to upgrade your game, try your best to upgrade your social connection. Doesn't mean you have to say, screw you to all your old friends or whatever, but it might mean you need to spend strategic less time with people with bad habits, whatever those are, you get to decide, and find a tribe that has good habits, whatever those are, you get to decide. We are fundamentally programmable. Now, this is our social nature. This is our human nature. We can adopt our brains and our genetics in many varied landscapes, from the very Arctic to the very equator, to island nations, to everything in between. We are highly adaptable. And that is one of the key features of why humans have sort of taken over the earth, and why we're the top of the top, the beyond apex predator. I mean, we're like another level of apex predator, because we can dominate any landscape on earth due to our programmable nature. We can be programmed through cultural paradigms, through our own self-definitions, through things like mind control techniques are a really good example of how humans are programmable. One of the protections of our programmability, and one of the ways that we can be programmed in the healthiest possible way without self-deception or being deceived by other people for their own benefits, is being programmed within a tribe of like-minded individuals. And this is called the Dunbar's number. We have Robin Dunbar, the anthropologist, to thank for this concept here, and we're going to talk about this in a second. This tends to be the natural subdivision of human groups or tribes, and it's roughly 150 people. And now there are other numbers nested within the Dunbar's. Now that number is the number that we can reasonably know all 150 of those people. We can track our shared relationships, our shared experiences, etc. over time. We can actually help serve roughly 150 people before we become overburdened just by the sheer number, the sheer volume of faces and stories and memories that we're trying to connect together. In the permaculture world, my teacher sort of made the point that 10 people can grow enough food for 100 people. So there's sort of like this natural Dunbar's number that occurs in businesses as well. Divisions within bureaucratic structures will often naturally begin to bifurcate from another division at about 150 people, or maybe somewhere around the 300 mark of your division in your corporation will naturally be able to fold itself into two halves, 250 person division groups that will actually outperform the larger groups or the smaller groups, because there's something special about that roughly 150 person number. Okay, so that's the Dunbar's number, right? So what this is suggesting is, so if we just stick to indigenous sort of patterns and lifeways, which of course is what an anthropologist is going to study, how we all genetically came into this earth, what we all used to do before civilization, before city living, that type of thing. We existed in small tribes of 150 people roughly. And that number of 150 people does not allow for loneliness to occur. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be forlorn or miss somebody or have isolation or individual time alone within a 150 person group. But what it does mean is depression is very unlikely to sneak in. Suicidal thoughts are very unlikely to sneak in because so many people are there touching base with you on a constant basis. And just think about one of the number one causes of loneliness might be like loss or profound loss of a child or a loved one that shook your reality to the core. Well, in a 150 person group, imagine losing a child, God forbid, right? That child would be grieved and understood to be a loss to the whole tribe. It's a distributed grief rather than an individualized grief, and a culture that says, well, take your 2 weeks off, but then just get back on the horse and get back to work and everything's normal again. Well, we all know if we've experienced grief that doesn't cut it. And that isolation version of grief can pull us into this epidemic of loneliness. And this is one of the ways to frame this epidemic of loneliness. So here is that Dunbar's number. That 150 person group is your tribe, friends that you would invite them to a party, you would know their story, etc. If you get higher than that, 500, 1,500, 3,000 people, these are people that become more acquaintances. You might kind of know them, but you don't really have an intimate relationship with them. At higher levels, people become more immoral with one another. So, hey, I don't really know that person. I need food. I need a car. I need a bike. I'm going to steal it from them. That's when often we find people doing, immoral or unethical things. If you go lower than that, you have 50 roughly close friends, 15 very close friends. You could confide in them your deepest, darkest secrets, and they could hold that space for you. And then a family unit of 5. So that just puts some meat to the bone of that Dunbar's number, 150 person, somewhere in that range. And of course, Americans are more likely to report feelings of isolation and loneliness. Okay, let's just briefly look at this. We have 3 graphs. Each one is from 2018, and then the next is from 2020, right? So the first graph is percentage who felt isolated, percentage of Americans who felt isolated. In 2018, 9% said often or very often, and in 2020, it was 23%. So the key to this graph is just showing that this is expanding sort of like in an exponential manner. If we go to the next graph, felt left out, so just felt left out of social interactions. In 2018, 6% often felt left out. In 2020, 14% often felt left out. And then the last one, lacked companionship, connection, intimacy. In 2018, 10% of Americans surveyed often felt they lacked companionship. And by just 2 years later, that number was up to 18%. So a huge jump in this sort of problem. And this is an article by Carrie McDonald that I just ripped off the internet here. And the reason I wanted to share this is because this is relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. And a new report by Harvard suggests 36% of Americans are experiencing what they call serious loneliness. And some groups, and this is where you really want to perk your ears up, such as young adults and mothers with small children, are especially isolated. Now, that is not a group that you want to be the most vulnerable in your society. That is a group that you want to be the most protected in your society, the most served in your society. It goes on, still Carrie McDonald's article here. According to the research findings, 61% of young people ages 18 to 25 reported feeling lonely frequently or almost all the time. So again, young people 18 to 25. And now 43% of these young adults indicated that their loneliness has increased since the pandemic and related lockdowns began. So that's 43% of that original number indicate that it has gotten worse. And they were already experiencing frequently or almost all the time loneliness. So now that has just almost doubled. And those results echo another finding that nearly half of young adults were showing signs of depression amid the pandemic response. And in August, the CDC reported that 1 in 4 young adults in this age range had contemplated suicide during the month of June. Now, working in the mental health field, we are used to seeing teens expressing suicidal ideation, but this is alarming by any metric, by any way that we measure it. Loneliness has gotten even worse since the pandemic, and it was already moving in the wrong direction, right? So we have become increasingly untrusting of our neighbors and other people generally. In 1987, for instance, 53% of those surveyed thought that their parents' generation was better off in terms of being more concerned citizen involved in helping others in the community, more of a community vibe, right? From 1987. In that same year, 77% of those surveyed thought the nation was worse off because of less involvement in community activities. Fast forward, 1992, 75% of the U.S. workforce said the breakdown of community and selfishness were serious or extremely serious. And I, of course, would agree with that. 8% of Americans thought the honesty and integrity of the average American were improving. Only 8% of Americans thought honesty and integrity of the average American was improving. That's not the direction you want to be going in. 50% thought America was becoming less trustworthy. And finally, in 1999, 66% thought America's civic life, so civic engagement, community engagement, had weakened in the recent years. And 80% of people thought we should put more emphasis on community, even if that makes more demands on them as an individual. So that's a huge portion of your population arguing for more community, more civic engagement, more honesty, more integrity, less selfishness, even if it means more work for them as an individual. And that was the biggest epidemic that no one is talking about. Basically, in a word, it's disconnection. It's not just loneliness. Why did the loneliness occur? Disconnection. Disconnection has been an arch and a thrust and a drive of our culture that we've lived in for years. So you can call it the control paradigm. A paradigm of control leads to individual disconnection from community, leads to individual disconnection from nature. That's the number one epidemic that nobody's talking about. Heard it here first, folks, or second or third or whatever. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks so much for taking the time. Please comment. What do you think? What do you notice about disconnection? Share your comments below. We'll read them all, and that makes this video all the more worth it to hear from you in the comments below. So thanks again, everybody. I appreciate you. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.